She signed the divorce papers with shaking hands while Christmas music played too loudly behind her, the ink bleeding slightly where a tear fell onto the page. And no one in that glittering room realized that the woman quietly breaking apart near the buffet table was about to walk away from a life worth billions. The party around her sparkled with champagne glasses and forced laughter, red dresses and gold lights, the kind of celebration where everyone pretends happiness is contagious, but inside her chest, something ancient and fragile was collapsing piece by piece, as her husband's voice echoed in her ears, "Cole's already done with her. Just sign it, Clara," he'd whispered earlier, smiling for the cameras like nothing was wrong. "Let's not make a scene tonight." And so she didn't. She never did. Clara signed, folded the papers carefully like they were fragile glass, and pressed them back into the envelope, her fingers numb, her heart beating far too slowly for someone still alive. She stood there for a moment after, staring at the Christmas tree towering in the center of the ballroom, its lights reflected in the polished marble floor, wondering how something could look so warm and feel so merciless at the same time. The tree reminded her of the first winter she and Evan had spent together, when they were young enough to believe love alone could protect them from the future, when he'd held her hands in a tiny apartment and promised that no matter how complicated life became, she would never feel alone. Now, at this party filled with his colleagues, donors, and powerful friends, she felt invisible in the most brutal way possible. People brushed past her without looking twice, assuming she was just another quiet spouse fading into the background, another woman whose marriage hadn't survived success. If they had known who she really was, if they had known what she carried behind her calm posture and downcast eyes, they might have looked at her differently, but perhaps not. Money had never made people kinder. It had only made them louder. "Are you okay?" a voice asked softly beside her, gentle enough to break through the noise. Clara turned to see a young waitress holding a tray of drinks, her uniform slightly too big, her smile cautious and kind in a way that felt rare. The girl's eyes flicked briefly to the envelope in Clara's hand, then back to her face, as if she already understood more than she was letting on. Clara hesitated, then nodded automatically, the reflex of someone trained to minimize her pain. "I'm fine," she said, though her throat burned as she spoke. The waitress didn't push. She simply set the tray down, picked up a napkin, and handed it to Clara without a word. That small act, so ordinary, so human, nearly undid her. Clara pressed the napkin to her eyes, embarrassed by the sudden surge of emotion, and whispered a thank you that came out broken. The waitress smiled again, this time warmer, then slipped back into the crowd, leaving Clara standing there with a strange, aching gratitude for a stranger who had seen her when no one else had. Across the room, Evan laughed loudly, his hand resting possessively on the arm of a woman Clara had never seen before, younger, polished, already fitting into the life Clara was being erased from. The sight hit her harder than she expected, not because she wanted him back, but because it confirmed what she had already felt in her bones. He had moved on long before tonight. The divorce papers weren't an ending, they were a formality. Clara's mind drifted back through the years she had spent shrinking herself to fit beside him, trading her own ambitions for his comfort, hiding parts of herself so he could feel bigger, stronger, more important. He had never asked her what she gave up. He had never wanted to know. And yet she had loved him anyway, with a loyalty that now felt almost naive. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass, calling for attention, and the room gradually quieted as Evan stepped forward, his smile effortless, his confidence intact. "I just want to say how grateful I am." He began, launching into a speech about success, teamwork and new beginnings, words that landed like small knives in Clara's chest. New beginnings. She wondered if he could feel the weight of what he had taken from her, or if men like him simply move forward without looking back, certain the world would always make room for them. As applause filled the room, Clara felt a sudden clarity settle over her, calm and terrifying in equal measure. She realized that for the first time in years, nothing was tying her to this place, to this version of herself. The papers in her hand were not just a loss. They were a release. She slipped the envelope into her pocket and turned toward the exit, her heels clicking softly against the floor, unnoticed amid the celebration. As she reached the door, she paused, glancing back one last time at the tree, the lights, the man she used to love, and felt a strange, quiet strength rise inside her. They thought this was the end of her story. They thought she was walking away with nothing. None of them knew that Clara had spent years preparing for moments like this, building something of her own in the shadows, something vast and powerful and deeply private. None of them knew that the woman leaving their Christmas party in tears was the same woman who owned half the companies they admired, the same woman who could change lives with a single phone call. And none of them knew that tonight, kindness from a stranger had reminded her exactly who she was, just before she decided what she would do next. The cold night air hit Clara's face the moment she stepped outside, sharp and clean, like a wake-up call she hadn't known she needed. And she stood there beneath the glow of the hotel's grand entrance for a long moment, breathing in deeply, letting the muffled sounds of laughter and music fade behind the heavy doors. Because for the first time that evening, the silence felt kinder than the noise. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket, and when she pulled it out, the screen lit up with messages she hadn't opened in weeks. Board members asking for her approval, lawyers waiting on her decisions, foundations seeking her guidance. Names and responsibilities that belonged to the life she had kept carefully separate from Evan's world. The life she had hidden not out of shame, but out of a quiet promise she had once made to herself. That her worth would never be measured by who she married. She didn't respond yet. Tonight wasn't about power or control. Tonight was about remembering what it felt like to be human. As she walked down the steps, she noticed the same waitress from earlier standing alone near the side entrance, shivering slightly as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. Counting crumpled bills in her hand under the yellow streetlight. Clara slowed, then stopped, watching her for a second, struck by how small the girl looked against the massive building. How easily lives like hers could disappear into the background if no one chose to notice. "Hey," Clara said gently, and the girl looked up surprised, her eyes widening with recognition. "I just wanted to thank you for earlier." The waitress smiled a little awkwardly and shrugged. "It's nothing. You looked like you needed it." The simplicity of the answer hit Clara harder than any speech inside. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her wallet, then stopped herself, suddenly aware of how hollow money could feel when it replaced genuine care. Instead she asked, "What's your name?" "Lena," the girl replied. "I'm saving up for school." Clara nodded slowly, something warm and resolute forming in her chest. "You remind me of myself," she said softly, surprising them both. They talked for a few minutes there in the cold, about nothing and everything, about long shifts and impossible dreams, about how kindness sometimes felt like a luxury people couldn't afford, and how choosing it anyway could change the course of a night, or a life. When they finally said goodbye, Clara pressed a folded card into Lena's hand, not explaining what it was, only saying, "If you ever need help, call this number." Lena tried to refuse, but Clara's eyes held a quiet certainty that made her stop. "Merry Christmas," Clara added, her voice steady now, and for the first time that night she meant it. The next morning, the story everyone told about the Christmas party was the same: Evan's speech, the elegance, the rumors of his new relationship. But there was another story unfolding far from the spotlight. Clara sat at her kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows of a home Evan had never cared to know. Signing documents with a calm precision that felt worlds apart from the trembling hand she'd had the night before. She finalized transfers, approved grants, and made calls that would ripple outward in ways few would ever trace back to her. One of those calls went to her legal team, not about the divorce, but about accelerating a project she'd kept on hold for years, a scholarship and mentorship program for women like Lena. Women who worked quietly in the margins while carrying dreams that deserved space to grow. Weeks later, Lena stood in an office she had never imagined entering, holding an acceptance letter with her name on it, her hands shaking for an entirely different reason as she listened to Clara explain the opportunity in front of her. "Why me?" Lena asked, tears threatening to spill as she looked at the woman she now knew was far more than a guest at a party. Clara smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. "Because someone once saw me when I needed it," she said. "And I promised myself I'd never forget how that felt." She never mentioned the divorce, or the billions, or the night everything had ended and begun at the same time. She didn't need to. Kindness didn't require context, it only required courage. As for Evan, he learned the truth slowly, painfully. As deals fell apart and partners grew distant, as he realized that much of the stability he had taken credit for had quietly rested on Clara's unseen influence. By the time he understood what he had lost, not just a wife but a force of compassion and strength he had never truly known, it was too late. Clara never confronted him. She didn't need closure from someone who had never learned how to see her. Her peace came from watching lives change, from choosing softness without weakness, from knowing that even on her worst night, she had still found a way to give. On the next Christmas Eve, Clara stood in a modest hall filled with laughter that felt real, watching Lena help other young women decorate a tree that wasn't grand or expensive but glowed with something far more powerful than lights. As Clara hung a simple ornament on one of the branches, she felt a quiet, unshakable certainty settle over her. Losing everything had taught her who she truly was. And finding kindness in herself in a stranger, in a moment no one else noticed, had made her richer than she had ever been.